Chapter 7 Neurotic Bombardment. A terrifying injection device of crude craftsmanship offset by the smooth, beautiful hands of Miss Elsa was brandished deliberately in the air before me. My back shivered as my spine sprouted millipede legs. I shook and rocked with increasing veracity, just glaring at such a horrific tool. She looked back at me, shot me a warm smile, one that penetrated even the bitter cold of this submerged base. Within a flash of a moment, she loaded the odd contraption with a small, palm-sized bottle of odd liquid. Her hand motioned it in the air. She clicked 3 small levers on it, and it started up with a powerful hiss that echoed through the room. Its warbled voice finally shriveled once she calmed it with a couple more clicks. It resembled a pistol, with a grip looking exactly like one. Same trigger mechanism and everything, yet melted onto its top half is a metal framework. Within said frame rests the most horrific component, a computer-operated pneumatic syringe. The body of it was cylindrical, of course, with a crude exterior mount made of metal amalgam melted into the frame. Along its length were tubes and wires, respectively organized above and below one another. The tubes hooked into the plunger, which was filled with the odd liquid. The tip of the syringe was the worst bit, a disc of various metal pipes attached to the glass tube, with 3 full needle tips protruding from the front. I pointed at it, eyes glazed and skin pale, and Miss Elsa returned with that warm smile and pointed at the needles directly with an inquisitive look. I nodded, and she pulled Maxie over to briefly demonstrate. She held the gun at the base of his neck, more specifically the C7 and T1 vertebrae, with the longer upper needle pointed at the C7, the shorter lower needle which pointed at the T1, and the mid-length needle which pointed squarely between the two. Both needles were going into the vertebrae directly, and the intention was to flood my CSF with bacteriophages built to defend against the mallow. I nodded, still pale and shivering. Elsa walked over to me slowly. Calmly, she sat down beside me. A waft of lavender with a hint of strawberry clouded my nose for nary a moment. A pleasant moment. Her red lips pursed into a tight, cute smile, and her hand rested gently on the bottom of my jaw. Maxie and Ron closed in, with Ron placing his hands on my shoulders. My eyes faced forwards as I felt the alcohol dab on my neck. I quivered. Elsa kept my gaze forward, facing Ron, who was assuring me and painstakingly mouthing the words, "You are okay," as he nodded. Behind me, I heard the machine click to life. The pressurization was garbled into intricately rhythmic clicking noises in time with my heartbeat. My hands were placed on the metal table I was resting on, my eyes locked in a dire glare into Ron's eyes. Any moment I looked away, I heard a distracting sound that redirected me to Ron and Maxie. Elsa's hand was placed on my shoulder. She squeezed me tightly. The hissing came to a high-pitched halt, and my eyes opened wider than they've ever been opened. The click, then crack, then clunk of the machine. Its minute mechanical motions being mimicked by my entire head as it jerked terribly in time with it. I couldn't see, I couldn't feel, I could only cry quietly. I did so, and the warbled hissing continued, and the ramshackle torture gun in my neck continued to jerk and shake horrifically. Soon enough, my pain was relieved with a resounding crack and a neat click. The syringe was removed delicately, and I heard the audible clink of her gently placing it down. I shook desperately. I couldn't feel my neck. I couldn't feel my body. Only cold. My vision trembled, blurring Ron and Maxie into momentous lines that came and went whenever they pleased. In my ears was ringing, loud shouting with banging and crashing, hurried footsteps and rampant shrieking. My thoughts were awash with a cloud of confusion, of fear and horror. I could feel my fingers slowly bend and break, snapping into place as I curled them with all my strength. Soon my hands were clenched into fists. I could hear it all now, all the screaming and all the words nobody wished anyone would hear. I could hear voices once more, and their panic was immense, speaking of an exploding patient whose blood wouldn't stop pouring. I was met with a warm hand on my face that pulled me into incredibly warm fabric. Instantly, something was there. I was less alone than I was. The hand was Elsa's. My eyes still shook, but I couldn't make it out. She covered my mouth and held me to her shoulder. Her warmth radiated through me slowly. It enveloped me and took me into a deep slumber. Chapter 8. Recovery. The final time I awoke was arguably the worst. In a grandiose panic, I fled out of bed in direct response to blaring red alarms. Hands trembling, I clothed myself, grabbed my plasma cutter, and booked it down the hall. In the lounge area there is, mounted on the wall, a large screen. It was on and playing some rather strange sounds, like garbled bubbles being pressurized and sucked through a narrow shaft, with a resounding bassy grumble following whenever it halted. I almost mistook the screen for being off, but various translucent particles floated and blurred near the source of the feed, being illuminated as they passed the light mounted on the camera. The alarms still screaming, I heard a warbled, lightly pitched voice behind me. It was Elsa. I turned to see her and Ron. Her gaze was locked onto me, and Ron's was locked on the screen. Elsa approached with a clipboard. On it was written, "Maxie went out to investigate high anomalous activity in the cavity." He left, and within minutes the activity spiked. The feed went dark, and all we could hear was his screaming. Once we managed to hook back into his feed, we couldn't hear or see anything. He's not moving, and the screen is locked onto his external camera feed. We can't find the internal one. I nodded and looked again at the TV. Ron was standing in front of it, with a luminous keyboard under his hands. He was typing spastically, with a number of small windows popping up while he worked. Elsa grabbed my shoulder and sped-walked me to the airlock. She pointed to a suit, a real Derelict suit, and I took it as a sign to put it on. It took a few minutes, but by the time I was ready, Ron was standing beside me in his own suit. He motioned for me to get closer, and when I did, he clicked a tiny electronic device into the back of my helmet. The glass encompassing the faceplate is incredibly thick. Between the layers is one tiny layer of invisible polymer. This polymer only becomes visible once a certain kind of light is shown on it. The same light that is beamed from the projectors within the helmet. The projectors are next to my neck and above my head, but they all point to specific places on the glass, making clear, visible text whenever they beam the light onto it. This device he clicked in was an auxiliary attachment, enabling text-to-speak functionality. Within seconds, I could see Ron's words spoken to me through the clear baby blue neon text on my faceplate. "Do you read me?" I almost wished the device had the capability to italicize. My joy was incomparable. I said, "Yes," back, and I could see the word appear just under his question. With a wide smile, Ron patted me on the back and stuffed into my hands a railgun built to operate under these pressures. Along with this, he handed me a small satchel. This had 5 extra payloads I could use with the gun and a spare battery cell to keep it charged. Our target was the massive cavity our base was beside, the very one that has the alpha base suspended within its gullet. Maxie's signal was found directly on top of Alpha, meaning he would need to travel along the support ropes. Below the base is the planet's very own jaw, metaphorically, of course. It really is a gargantuan tube leading down into a more narrow shaft. At the top of the chasm, you can barely see the opposite side, yet near the bottom, you could easily hold yourself up with both arms extended. There is a hole down there. It's just larger than a human, and it has always fumed a vicious black smoke. This smoke is theorized to be the origin of Malo. Delta Base was made to investigate this stuff directly, and they've been requiring a sample from the bottom of the pit. Perhaps if I were to fall off the rope, I might just survive and help the station too. The only issue with exploring the cavity is its jailer anomaly. Jailers are huge creatures, completely disinterested in leaving their home, and aggressive towards those who intrude and attempt to leave. This jailer is that of a lophid, specifically the species Lasiognathus amphorampus. If it were hyper-evolved to be larger than all of our bases and twice as brutal in a fight. A wolf trap angler, bigger than our comprehension. That's what lurks within the chasm. Despite being part of the Thaumatechthes family, the creature has evolved to be more similar to a one-aroid, a dreamer. Dreamer lophids wander the reaches of the deep sea, completely dazed by their own esca and awaiting prey to swiftly eat. The jailer mimics this to an extreme, despite its form being far more geared to assault creatures. Its lengthy body swirls gently within the cavity, slowly encircling its black depths, lost in a deadlock glare with its esca. Our operation will involve us quietly getting on top of the base, finding Maxie, and leaving the moment we have him. No noise unless completely necessary. We are going in with nothing but our suits and whatever equipment we can carry on it. Powerful pressure flooded the airlock, filling it with icy cold waters and submerging us. Once filled, a moment of silence before the alarm banged on and the doors slowly opened. The outside was pitch black, nighttime, and you could hear the distant grumble of engines and creatures. The machine yard lights were on full. Grand spotlights illuminated miles of its wreckage-laden region, with intermixed colors from various plates and remaining ships poking through the dense shades of gray and blue. You could make out the gouged innards of starships, warp and flux engines pouring across the plateaus, and a rather beautifully preserved capital ship in the center being the primary focus of the spotlights. You could also see the drones the machine yard employs, like miniature submarines the size of a man with a number of articulated arms. These metallic zeppelins were surreal. They guided along with no effort or care, no emotion or character, just steel balloons idly moving. Above the yard, gently illuminated, were its protectors, the larger submarines that were built strictly to gore any creatures that come near. These submarines rivaled the jailers. They're absolutely massive, and it was clear evidence of the yard's anomalous nature. It's unlikely the size of its protectors were a random decision. It clearly responded to the jailers and adapted as necessary. And those vessels still continue to have design flaws, proving it's still evolving the design. Despite being able to see grand metal death machines in the distance, it became clear to us why the protectors were out. Lots of anomalous activity across the planet. Maxie was merely investigating a growing epicenter. Above our heads were dozens of creatures of all sizes, including some that were youthful jailers. They swarmed and encircled the machine yard, pressuring its drones and protectors from all ends. Whenever a distant blip resounded from one of the creatures, a responding roar of engines was heard, with an occasional bang and crash as they clashed. Ron directed me to the chasm, trying his damnedest to keep me distracted from everything around us. In the distance, I could see the exit from the tram I took, with its mouth now regurgitating vicious black smoke and droplets of limpid liquid, similar to what I saw as I traveled through it. Below in the trenches was more of this smoke, billowing recklessly towards the machine yard and pooling beneath it. Our sights were soon set upon the faded red bulbs mounted on the metal pillars atop the alpha base. We stood next to one of the great clamps holding the base up, with its massive cable extending into the dark nothing. About 6 feet across, but entirely cylindrical, making slipping too easy. Text appeared suddenly on my visor, a message from Ron telling me to enable my magnets. These suits can be divided into 4 separate modules: the helmet, the chest rig, the pelvis rig, and the boots. The rest is covered in plates. The helmet houses the communication and surveillance modules. The chest houses life support and backup power. The pelvis has pneumatic strength modules that allow the user to walk around on the seafloor regardless of depth. This is where the power goes that requires a backup. Finally, the boots have magnetic locks inside that allow you to latch onto any metal surface. Other suits have different modules in different places. Really, these ones were designed for this planet. I texted back to Ron that I had no idea how to activate mine. He took a knee and clicked a few things on my ankles. Eventually, I saw the magnets were active on my visor, with battery indicators to let me know how close to dead they are. I raised one foot and planted it onto the cable. It locked into place and I could feel the intensity of the neodymium magnets beneath it. I planted my next foot and took lead, balance beaming my way into an infinite abyss.